TVET should also flow from the top to the bottom so that they have representation all the way up as we have it at GES. Then heads of basic schools should also be given some opportunity to head senior high school was an issue that came up. However, we were made to understand that we do basic education for basic level and we do secondary education. So with basic education, there's no way you'll be allowed to go and do secondary education. There was also an issue of people getting stuck after progressing to deputy directors at the senior high schools, because then the director position would have to be vacant before you can progress. Recommendations were as follows: that we should decouple the directorship, make it so that it is a rank rather than a position, so that I can move from assistant director or whatever, deputy director to director, and not as it currently stands where the director is a position, and hence if there's no vacancy, I can't occupy that position. So it should be made so that the position is different from the rank, and hence people can apply to occupy the position, and when they finish their term, they go back to wherever they came from. There's also an issue of no proper scheme of service for teachers within the GES, and hence we are encouraged to ensure that we put in place some scheme of service for teachers within the GES to guide their work. Another recommendation is on Director Generals for pre-tertiary education should come from the teachers or from within that pre-tertiary education system and not from outside. They were specific on we're not picking them from the universities, because an example was given that the qualification for a vice chancellor at the university is a professor, and hence we don't go and pick people who are not professors to be VCs. Likewise, if you are picking the IGP, you don't pick any other person apart from a policeman to be the IGP. So they want us to move that same ladder so that for pre-tertiary, we pick people within that level to be the Director General. There was also discussions on the tenure of the regional and district directors of education within GES. There was a recommendation that that should be a position which will have term limits, such that I don't become a director of education or regional director till I retire. I become regional director to serve a term of 3 years or 4 years, because there are several other directors who are qualified to occupy that position. So when I finish my term, I get back and then other people continue. I understand currently when you step in there until you retire, you don't go. So all your age mates, immediately you step in there, all your age mates are automatically barred from occupying that position because you retire with them. So we are encouraged, or we've recommended that we should look at that, because at the universities, it works that way. Our heads of departments is a term, the dean is a term, the provost is a term, the vice chancellor is a term. So if that same thing can be replicated, that will help us. Razak. Then there were other issues too on licensure examination. The recommendation is that licensure examination should be done whilst you're in school and you complete and go with your license, and not you finishing school before going back to write licensure exams. Examples were given such as you don't become a lawyer if you have not been licensed or called to the bar. You don't become a nurse if you've not passed the licensure exam. So same should apply to the GES, such that when you are in school, wherever it can be placed, whether the final exam or whatever, you write your licensure exams before you leave school, so that you leave school as a teacher and not leave school as a teacher without a license. Yeah. Then there were issues too on the school boards or councils. Currently, the issues were that some government reps on councils, people feel do not have what it takes to be on the council. So we recommended that the government representatives on council should have what it takes to serve on those councils. In fact, it was stressed that people on council should be good lobbyists who will lobby for the institutions and help them, and not people who will just sit on council for the term to end, and then we don't see the value addition of their representation on council. We are made to understand that one council meeting for some tertiary institutions is around 60,000. So if you are not resourceful enough to help the university make money, then it just means that we are just taking money out of the university. So government should look at their representatives on council and ensure that there are people who are resourceful, who are lobbyists, who can help the universities to also make some good money from either donors or whoever we get. Then there was also the issue of GTech. There were concerns about the powers GTech has and how they use such powers. There were examples of situations where tertiary institutions have submitted their accreditation documents to GTech, lying on their tables for 5 years, and by the time they realize they publish that their programs they are running are not accredited. So the same GTech which has your programs sitting on their desks is publishing that your programs you are running are not accredited. So we should check that. Recommendations were made that an online system will help. However, that was defeated immediately because some online applications were also made and were not able to solve the problem. Then for school monitoring, there were issues around how does a headmaster monitor to ensure that a teacher is in the classroom teaching at the time he or she is supposed to be teaching. So there were some recommendations on using technology. There were some countries where there's technology you can use to be in your office as a headmaster to know if a teacher is in the classroom teaching, or even to know if a student is in the classroom. And they also recommended that it can be extended to parents to also be sure that their wards are in school. So we recommend that we explore such technologies to see how we can address issues of quality within our schools regarding teaching and learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next presentation will be by Research Evidence for Decision. Research. Okay. Shall we take from infrastructure, if you are ready? Infrastructure. So please keep your questions, your submissions, your contributions. After all the presentations, we will take them. That is why we are here today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm here to give a brief presentation on infrastructure. Basically, when we talk about infrastructure, people look at only the physical infrastructures that we have at the various schools. But in this breath, we are going to talk about both the physical and then the ed tech. When we talk about EdTech, we are talking about the education technology systems that we need to also augment the various teaching that we carry out at the various schools. So we identified 5 areas And these 5 areas were the challenges that we have with respect to the infrastructure, the public-private partnership, the way the private system can come in to help assist government in financing infrastructure. We also discussed sustainability with respect to infrastructure. Then general maintenance. We all know the need for a lot of maintenance at our various schools. And then finally, we discuss inclusion, talking about those who are physically challenged, as we call them. Now, under the challenges, the team spoke about the need to have a lot of story buildings, because most of the times, because of land restriction, we end up having challenges in introducing other facilities at the various schools. So there's a need to encourage the building of story buildings in areas that the kids have the age to do that, especially at the secondary and then the tertiary level. And then we recognize that when it comes to the basic level, that's the KG, the GHS, and then the secondary level, most of the times the ICT is not available. So there's a need to introduce ICT at the basic level of our education system. Now, one important fact that I will realize is that most of the developmental activities that are going on doesn't have a very good basis in terms of auditing. So there's a need to go around and audit all schools so that we can have these things on paper. They will know that this is the state of this school and that is the state of that school. So that when we have to do the add-ons, we'll be very much clear what each and every school lacks. So infrastructure auditing at the various schools is very, very important. And then basically we realize that washrooms are also a major factor. We need to augment the washrooms that we have at the various schools. And then these washrooms, most of the times, we need to make them very close to the classroom blocks, so that because when you go to most of our secondary schools, you realize that the washrooms are mostly available at the dormitories. So students have to leave some of the classrooms and then attend washrooms at the dormitories. We also talked about the need to design a modern classroom system, modern dormitory systems that will have a teacher accommodation, so that we have a staff accommodation attached to the dormitory, so that anytime the kids are not doing the right thing, he can hurriedly attend to the situation. And then we talked about constant flow of water. Most of the times, there's a problem with the flow of water at the various campuses. So it's very important we enhance the constant flow of water. And then the lack of furniture. Mainly at the basic schools, furniture is a big challenge. So we spoke about the different types of furniture that we need, so that we can introduce enough. I mean, we need to make enough available at the various school levels. And then the EdTech installation. There's a need to make sure we install enough of this technology at the various school levels, as I mentioned earlier. And then the TVET also lacks a lot of infrastructure. So there's a need to improve the infrastructure need at the various TVET levels. And then we have a lot of e-blocks that are uncompleted, that are sitting down. So there's a need to go back to this e-block and then complete most of them. The team also suggested that the TVET guys can be engaged in some of these constructions, not to the larger extent, because that's their training. So any area in terms of being it the furniture or basic construction that they can take up, there's a need to make sure we give them that practical hands-on training, so that they'll be doing things that are realistic, even on their own campuses, that can be taken care of. We made suggestion of 3D printing of furniture. So in modern terms, we can look at 3D printing of furniture. And then the furniture bit, we also talked about the WPC system. That is the plastic wooden system that is more friendly when it comes to some of these things in terms of cost. Yeah. And then like UCC, as the Pro VC mentioned this morning, there's a need for a lot of halls of residence because it looks like we have not been able to add a lot to what we had years back. So there is a need to attend to the accommodation issue. We also talked about the need to build additional public universities because if you look at the introduction of the free SHS, you realize that now the top of the triangle is getting bigger. So now the pressure is coming to the tertiary level, and it's very imperative we make sure we increase the capacities at the various tertiary level. Yeah. And the concern of so many uncompleted structures at the various schools, we need to go back, and through the auditing, we'll know structures that some of them need a little bit of addition, and then it can be usable. So it's very important we go back and then find out how many structures are still there that needs to be completed. Because sometimes it's more affordable to attend to these things than to start a new construction. A lot of contractors have abandoned some of these structures. We discussed the ICT system that we need to streamline admissions for all the public universities so that if you don't gain admission at the UCC, you can manage and then get admission elsewhere. Because sometimes the statistics is wrong. You might think maybe 30,000 students applied. We only admitted maybe 20,000. But then it's imperative government gets to know that, okay, this is the true number of people who didn't get admission. So we need to synchronize this admission system at the various tertiary institutions. So that ends the presentation under the current challenges for the infrastructure. Okay, so then we discussed the PPP. That's the engagement of the private sector. We mentioned the need for the tertiary institutions to advertise, to let the public know about the need to come in and assist in building some of these halls of residence. We have these models at the various tertiary institutions, but I believe strongly that a lot of people are not aware. So there's a need to make it very public so that a lot of people who have interest in coming to start some of this construction can come in and then enter into an agreement with the various universities, especially in the areas that are income generative, like building of halls of residence. Yeah. And then we should also encourage the government agencies who have the funding to come in and help in putting up some of these halls of residences, like SNIT did in Lagos some time back. There are a lot of them that might have the funds to want to venture into these areas. We talked about government trying to source for equipment from the main source. So if you need to buy computers, it's encouraging that we go to the main manufacturers, speak to them, and bring these things in bulk. It helps a lot in that regard. Yeah. And then the industry, invitation of industries to come on board to sponsor various tertiary programs or research. That can also help in financing some of these researches that students carry out at the tertiary level. And then the need for IPPs to come in and take care of power supply, mainly at the tertiary institutions, because cost of electricity has become very expensive, and there are individuals who can take up these challenges, or companies that can take up, IPPs especially, who can take up these challenges, come on board and then help in generating power. And these powers can be very specific, and then just to take care of the particular campus of interest. And then under sustainability, basically we think we can introduce skylights for various roofing systems that we have around, so that instead of having lights on all the time, we can have these skylights giving us sunlight in the various classrooms. And then the rain harvesting also came on board. It's important we harvest most of the rains on the various campuses and introduce a solar pump system so that every time there will be enough water to serve mainly the washrooms and then other areas that requires that. We also talked about anaerobic digester. If we can introduce anaerobic digester at the campuses, we can make the best out of those situations. Planting of trees, which is very basic, was also discussed as well. We talked about solar, but the issue was the cost, the initial cost of having solar systems. So we felt like if we can have more panels that can rather serve during the daytime, that would be great. So that we save the cost on having too many power batteries that will store the power, because most of the times the students don't use too much power in the course of the night. So there's a need to rather look at that breadth of it, because maintaining solar could be very, very expensive. And then the designs in terms of architecture should be looked at. So we can have classrooms with very large windows. That gives perfect cross ventilation, and as well as looking at the materiality of what we have to use. So that ended the sustainability bit of it. Then maintenance. One of the challenges we have is maintenance, because clearly most of our structures on campuses have been left not taken care of. So we talked about the need for government to have an allocation, budgetary allocation, to take care of nothing but maintenance. Then there is a need to also introduce facility managers so that they will help the maintenance officers at the various campuses, because they will go around and then identify the problems and then make it known to the various maintenance officers. And then when there's a need to report to the appropriate agencies or government agencies, then they can go ahead and then do that. There's a need to draw a standard maintenance schedule for various schools so that people will follow suit and make sure things don't get out of hand. In that case, it will help us to have more proactive maintenance activities. There's a need to maintain school roads, because it looks like nobody talks about school roads. You go to most of the campuses, the school roads are in a very bad state. So it's very important we look at the sewage and then the school roads maintenance. And then structural integrity assessment. Most of the schools are having a lot of problems with their structural integrity, and it could be very, very dangerous. So if we can go around and do the auditing like I mentioned earlier, then we can comfortably handle most of these structural issues. Some of them require nothing but basic concrete and then mortar. So that ends the presentation on maintenance. Now, inclusion. There's a need to design enough disability-friendly washrooms at the various schools, because it looks like most of the schools don't have disability washrooms. It's been ignored. Then we need to also design standard lift, standard ramps, and introduce disability lift at the areas that we can afford, so that they will not be left out in accessing some of these facilities that are available on campuses. And then there's a need to comply with the building codes and then the acts that have been set down to take care of our brothers and sisters. So this brings my presentation to the end.
Thank you very much. I think we should have a special forum for infrastructure alone. Okay. Education financing. Education financing. Prof. Anson, is that your group? Okay, all right. Ten minutes, please.
Thank you very much. So we had about 4 thematic areas that we needed to look at. The first one had to do with funding challenges, and we identified 4 main challenges. 1, inadequate funding. 2, delays in disbursement. 3, issue of bureaucracy. And then the 4th one being misapplication of funds. So there were some series of questions. One was how to ensure that there is adequate delivery, the funding problem doesn't affect the quality of education or the delivery of education. So we realized that when there is inadequate funding, first and foremost, it leads to what we termed hungry children, right? Once they don't get food to eat, it affects their concentration and the ability to absorb things that they are taught in class. So that is one way inadequate funding can affect delivery of education. We also identified abandoned projects. Most of the projects that were supposed to give access have not been completed, and that leads to limited access to education. We saw poor monitoring and evaluation / supervision. Many of lower level education, to ensure that there is quality, there must be sufficient supervision, there must be sufficient monitoring and evaluation. Once the supervisors do not get the necessary funding, they don't also go ahead to do this supervision, and that can affect the quality of education. We saw inadequate and inappropriate infrastructure provision. So if there is poor funding, it is not only the case that there will be inadequate infrastructure, but sometimes the infrastructure that is given is of very poor quality. They don't meet the standard that is required for the levels that they are meant for. Then also we realize that it leads to poor funding can lead to inadequate teaching and learning materials for the students, and that will affect the quality of the education. It leads to low morale for the teachers, and here it's not just about the fact that teachers won't be paid. They will get their salary, but the tools that they need, especially in their labs to be able to teach their students, will not be there. And when that happens, it leads to job dissatisfaction. Then there was the point of poor assessment of learners. The amount that is normally sent for assessment is so low. So normally most teachers do not carry out this assessment. If it must be done, say twice, maybe they will just do it once because there is no funding for that. And we know that when there is no assessment, that can affect the quality of education as well. Then for the TVET students especially, it leads to limited practical sessions. So the teachers spoke about how much it costs to be able to undertake practicals for their students. And because there is no funding, most of the time they are not able to do that. So practicals, instead of it being actual practicals, they go there and they teach theories. So those were some of the challenges we identified as a result of poor funding. Then we addressed the question of how can government funding be optimized. Here we sought to find ways by which the little money that is even coming to these schools, either at the basic level, tertiary level, how can we make the maximum use of that? One suggestion was to strengthen the internal and external auditing mechanisms that we have in place, so that if we have the auditors working, monies will not be misapplied, monies will not be used for other purposes. Then point 2 was that we redirect MP's common fund component for education for that purpose. So the point was made that most times our MPs tend to use the money. We know that there are components or sections meant for everything, but they end up using even the portion that is meant for education for other purposes rather than education. So we recommend that that should be checked. Then we should decentralize education financing. So there was the point of when we see the approval from the ministry, the money actually goes through a lot of channels before it gets to the schools. And in that process, the teachers are of the view that sometimes there is some difference between what they see in the news and what finally hits their coffers. So if we decentralize the process, it could help. We said they should strengthen the checks and balances structures that are already in these schools, so that headmasters or people, spending officers will not just have the opportunity to use money anyhow. there should be some mechanisms. They already have them, but these checks and balances can be strengthened to avoid wastage at that level. Then finally, under how to optimize government funding, the last point we raised was to avoid the misuse of political powers for excessive creation of secondary schools. So the point was made that most of the time, when people become Omahene or something of that sort, they lobby to have schools in their areas of jurisdiction, but close by there may be another secondary school. That becomes irrelevant. They just want to also have secondary school at their place to show that they are good chiefs and leaders. So we can check that to ensure that only districts and places where they need these schools are actually created, so that the limited funding will not be spread thin across several secondary schools. We move to innovative financing models. So after identifying the challenges with regards to funding of schools, we now want to look at ways by which we can innovatively suggest some ways to raise funds. So some of the suggestions include we should bring on board the private sector, introduce private-public partnerships, and see where the private sector can support. At the tertiary level, I know with even with UCC, especially when it comes to hostels, we have private companies and institutions putting up these hostels and then running to make some money, but in the process also helping the universities to be able to accommodate the students. So we can encourage private-public partnerships. We can introduce school farms. Okay, one of the major issues about free SHS is about the feeding component. So the suggestion is that if we make the school farms policy very vibrant, the schools on their own can produce their food, and that can limit the cost with regards to food. Then generally, we propose schools to find ways to create and utilize their own internally generated funds. We encourage the channeling of CSR initiatives towards education. So corporate bodies normally have the discretion to spend some amount of their money towards the development of their community. Because it's discretionary, they can choose to use it anywhere. But then the government can kind of persuade and encourage them to look more or be more focused on education. So CSR initiatives can be channeled towards education. Similarly, we said the royalties that communities receive, the chiefs and kings, they can also use that to support education more. Then we said anchor universities and TVET schools and local companies generally can be encouraged or supported to produce the furniture that is needed in various schools, right? Instead of importing all of this furniture that come with a lot of cost, and others raise the issue of quality, why not give the technical universities and TVET institutions such an opportunity so that the funds or money that will be spent importing can be used to support these institutions instead. Then we spoke about allowing old students to support their schools. That is ongoing, but in time past, the government came to stop that. But I think it's a good call, and we can encourage that. Then point 10 is similar to that. We should bring up the PTA system and make them an integral part of school management. Once they become part of the school management, though voluntarily, they contribute very significantly towards the development of these schools. Then finally, we should engage NGOs and multinational organizations to support education. A point was made that because of free SHS, most of these institutions are becoming reluctant to contribute towards supporting the funding of education. So government can deliberately engage them to get their support in terms of the funding. Then we address the question, the mechanisms, what mechanisms should be put in place to address the funding gap in education, especially for free SHS. there. So we basically sought to find ways by which we can support the continuity of free SHS. So we said, point one, we should establish a funding pool to encourage contribution towards free SHS. Okay, something that is akin to what happened at the National Cathedral project, where people were made to contribute voluntarily. But this time around, it's not National Cathedral. We can have a pool that is meant to support education, so that corporate bodies, churches, and other individuals who so desire can make contribution towards that. Point two, we said we should expand the sources of free SHS to include all mineral resources. Currently, we know it's only a percentage of the oil revenue that is meant for free SHS. But because these mineral resources are meant for all Ghanaians, our argument is that all other mineral resources, including gold and all other sectors, should have a percentage dedicated towards free SHS. Then we spoke once again about the PTA system, that they should be brought on board for them to contribute towards the free SHS system. Then point four, we called for a review of free SHS to see which components can be handled by parents. So there was the point that when it gets to examination, that is no longer part of kind of education that should be the source of burden for the government. And that parents may consider or can be encouraged to take up the BEC and WASI examination registration fees. So generally there is this suggestion that yes, the free SHS can still exist, but can there be a review to see the component where parents can be called upon to take up those aspects? Then we looked at the issue of accountability and transparency and this funding issue in schools. So to encourage that, some of the measures we put in place or we suggested were that point one, we should encourage whistleblowers and prevent intimidation of whistleblowers. So most of the teachers said if you had concerns about how resources were used and you raised the issue even with your headmaster, they report you to the district's office, and the next thing you see is that you have a query letter for insubordination, right? That really prevents people from coming out with blow whistles about wrongdoings in schools. So we should find ways to allow people to be able to blow or report bad deeds in these schools. Then point two, we should strengthen the boards to ensure transparency and accountability. So once again, we have boards in place, but it looks as if these are normally, they are structured in such a way that it's only people that will say yes to the people in power or those in charge of disbursement that are brought onto this board. So they lack that accountability and transparency. So we should find ways to strengthen the boards in various schools. Then we addressed the issue about separating politics from administration. So sometimes people feel emboldened to actually waste their resources in these schools because they feel their party is in power. Excuse me. So there should be professionalism. So that no matter the political party, once you are a professional, working as head teacher, working as a teacher, your professionalism should be what should count for whatever will happen to you and not because your political party is in power. So there should be separation of your administration from politics. So those were the suggestions we made with regards to accountability and transparency. Finally, we go to equity and inclusion. So how do we encourage that or address the issue about inequality in educational delivery? The first point, and this point was made very forcefully by the private schools participants, right? They said many of the things that are being done right now to public universities, the free things, they don't normally participate in that, and that is making their cost of operations very, very difficult. So private schools, mission schools, they are of the view that government should support them just as they support other public universities. For the mission schools, they said that government pays the salary of the teachers, but that is just about it. The other things are normally borne by the schools themselves. So government should look at that. Then we spoke about government taking into cognizance the needs of students with special needs and ensuring that schools are taxed to be built in such a way that they'll be friendly to people with disabilities. And we can do so by at least having, say, a dedicated school in each region, being known and recognized for that particular quality, such that if you have any problem with disability and you go to that particular school, you'll feel very comfortable staying there. So we should also pay greater attention to TVET. Most of the time when we discuss the secondary school education, we think only about the normal, in quotes, SHS, at the expense or neglect of the TVET institutions. So we encouraging government to pay attention to that in terms of funding and support. Then we said government should enforce 20% allowance for teachers in deprived areas. So people in deprived areas are normally disadvantaged because most teachers do not like to go to deprived areas. So if government was to enforce or pay some 20% allowance, that will encourage teachers to accept postings into these areas. Then we had other issues like placement should be based on merit. So this point actually came from one student participant, and their concern is that currently placement is normally done in a way that tends to go against people's or students from so-called privileged schools, the elite category A, category B schools, such that if you were there and you were even to perform well, you don't get your first choice schools, but sometimes you end up somewhere, right, third or something of that sort. So we should look at, there were probably good reasons why that policy was put in place, but it needs to be checked again because it's actually, now parents intentionally actually move their children from good schools, in quote, to rural schools and public schools because of this particular decision. So we said that should be looked at. Yes, so those were the points that we came up with as the Educational Financing Committee. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. Hanson. We take the penultimate presentation from research.
Thank you very much. I think the issue of research and evidence giving is critical, and so this has been reflected through a couple of lenses, and I'm here to present on those. Guided by what the terms of reference offer to us, the first thing we give consideration to is the issue of school placement, and a few reflective ideas have been shared by participants. Among others, the data infrastructure system, that's the actual hardware system as well as the personnel operating them, was brought to the fore. Security around software and its utilization were grounded. Number two, the system should be centralized with opportunity for interoperability features that makes the assessment across the centralized level expedient. Number three, there should be a harmonized implementation strategies to guide the implementation of local actors in their dispensation of work related to the computer school selection placement system. Data systems should also reflect the capacity of schools. In other words, the qualitative indicators about schools rather than quantitative performance adduced by learners should inform this, ranking for growth agenda. The district GES officers should be involved in the management of senior high schools in terms of monitoring and evaluation. And from the data and utilization point of view, this was considered key ingredient for success and effectiveness of program implementation by the participant. Research needs to inform what happens with GS policies, and so policies should come and be meaningful to the people who are going to be the end users of these policies. There should be a rotation or reshuffling of personnel who are manning this CSSPS to ensure transparency, neutrality, and effectiveness of engagement. The original 30% special placement quota should have governing rules to cater for marginalized schools with the various categories in mind. In other words, the underprivileged, the underserved should be redefined by means of data available from from Ghana Statistical Service, as well as other data avenues to be able to get the meaningful implementation of this 30%. And what shows that 30% can remain forever? Again, research can engage us to see whether 25 in the coming years or 35 will be meaningful, can be implemented. There should be segregation of data within the SPSS to cater for the various forms of inclusion, disenfranchised persons, including persons with special needs. And this should be taken into consideration. And talking about special needs, and with the Ghana card in full implementation, there needs to be opportunity for us to know those who have the funds and the capacity to support education and those who do not. The self-placement should be restricted based on some parameters, location, and other ingredients we produce that the committee would definitely want to take a further look at. Under the declaration of the vacancies in senior high schools, it is important to check some indicators and shocks consistent with the policy that has been laid for its grounding. The second thing we did was to take a look at the policy level data, wherefore we established and engaged the major gaps we are seeing in operations of school, leading up to teaching and learning improvement, as well as school management, and indeed education ecosystem management, as well as elements that can improve things that are cross-cutting, including inclusion, relevant, credible data, and its availability on time. In that regard, a couple of reflections were given, but for the sake of time, allow me to just talk about 5 of them. Mapping out of spatial distribution of schools within district and region is an important parameter to help us see where Ghanaians are located, where they are schooling, and what opportunities we are offering them from the national baskets. The integrity of schools building and how we nurture them to carry on Ghanaian values is really critical, and it's a gap we need to study. The fact remains that much as we want to teach values, values themselves are not things we can hold and turn around anyhow we want it. And so we need to go more eccentric in terms of the approaches we use. And again, this calls for us to know it as a data gap and manage. Sorry. Within the ecosystem of education we have, there are a number of climate resilience dimensions that are happening, and it is a global concern. Much as this is the case, our curriculum, our teacher effort, our teacher professional development activities need to come back to the fundamentals of making sure that there's resilience building in climate action that we do in schools, at home, and wherever. And that bottles down to what our priorities are in terms of education. Indeed, parallel systems devoid of interoperability is called for at a large level, although it can be argued that interoperability is important when it comes to dealing with research activity. For example, we cannot be talking about computers alone without looking at its diverse and indeed deep effect it can have on the society and indeed the environment. And so we think about these things more broadly. And so a more multidisciplinary eye to engaging data in this respect is called for. The subject of inclusion is cross-cutting, and thank you, infrastructure, financing, all of you have already spoken about inclusion. But just to add 2 key points from there, the citizenship science should be engaging all we do. And thinking about citizenship, our diversity, our opportunities in these diverse spheres, our resources are shared in these diverse spaces must all encompass in our national conversation, our research, and our resource distribution. Indeed, head teachers should come to the fore in terms of figures, data, enrollment, school information, and this includes private school teachers. Indeed, our national conversation of education provision is inconclusive, minus the discussion around private schools. And therefore, anytime we seek to collect data, manage data, if it is minus private schools, we are doing a huge disincentive to this country. And from today on, as proposed, if the colleagues feel that this should be something we need to prioritize, regional directors, district directors, national headquarters must take note. Data accessibility and usage is a key thing. So after talking about all these data, how we use it is key. But how we use it to what effect? To the effect that teaching is improving, learning outcome is increasing, as well as management efficiency is happening across schools. A number of expert ideas were shared, and for the sake of time again, allow me to just point on 3 of them. Data management experts should be equipped with necessary resources to be able to carry out their work. And it is felt that if that is done, there's need for us to do work beyond business as usual by working with data that is usable. And therefore, if you bring chi-square, t-square, and whatever square to a head teacher in my community where I stay, and you want him to engage that science to turn around the school, it looks as if you are giving the right data to the wrong person. And so data needs to be meaningful as we utilize them. For enhancing teaching, there's need for personalized learning and teaching approaches that are performance-driven. So much as the only indicator we can use to show that the school system you gave us, your money we use as taxpayers to engage school is bringing results, is the performance we see in the students. And so how we generate the data, the assessment we give them, how we quality assure the assessment, and how we utilize them, we need to assure that, and we give a number of options that we are giving to the committee to take a look at. But data originally and practically need to be accessible to people. So we provided a number of options in terms of how this can be done. And for the sake of time, we don't want to belabor the point about them, but we just want to mention that out of the 9 points we made, they should just be made available to people, although at levels of engagement. Remember, some data nationally are classified, much as others are declassified. And with respect to national, regional, district, circuit, community, school level, learner level, we need to be very sure how much data we want to give and in what quantity and doses. With all those background, it is important for us to support President Mahama as well as the sector minister with a number of practical actions. Because regarding the issue of transformative agenda, a few things are more clear and reflective. For example, all the education theses that are produced for master's and doctoral level, when we dump all of them on the sector ministry, it will not make meaning to them. And so recommendation is being made in terms of the forms such information can go to the sector ministry so that it will be meaningful. In terms of policy brief and other things that can be given, these are proposed. But a big catch is the National Research Fund. This was proposed about a couple of years ago, and it has been on the policy conversation discussion. And it is an opportunity for our attendees and participants to reflect on the subject. Permit me now to spend some few more minutes on that one to tell us what they had to say. They said it is a good thing to have a national research fund, but they had a couple of ideas to share for implementers to take note of. Among other things, they said that there should be priority areas that are flagged so that the managers and administrators of such a fund are aware of this and anchor that in their thinking, planning, and implementation activities. There needs to be regional balance, gender balance, and call it inclusivity in how these resources are distributed to people, including institutions and individuals that access them. The need to avoid politicization of such an agenda is also key. But among other things, to make the fund sustainable, we need to be sure where would the money come from. The committee members discussed that it is important for us to think about tax avenues, resourcing avenues. Indeed, individuals who are even business mongers can be taxed on the big cars they buy, the houses they buy, for the purposes of the fund. So that the irrigation that goes on in our community and everything, as well as the climate action management, will all, at the end of the day, come to the fore. So those ideas were given. And finally, they have a couple of takes for our research space. Typically, anyone moving from Ghana to the United Kingdom or the United States to conduct a research will have a hurdle to cross. But typically, people coming to Ghana to research, okay, so you had an answer. So they may come and they'll be able to do something and go. So the environment of restrictedness to people accessing data in our country needs to be backed by some policy. And we flagged those ideas. And we feel that a number of things need to be done to safeguard such a national fund. Among other things, neutrality and the counterpart funding, philanthropists offering support. There's need to be who watches the watchman. And so the people who administer the fund, there should be a due mechanism, qualitative and quantitative, to measure their output. And they should also bring evidence to the Ghanaian people who are contributing to such a fund. So in effect, in terms of evidence, those are a few things we've been able to put together. And plus the ones I've not been able to present here because of time, I'm sure the community will be guided from what we have to see from Cape Coast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Research. We've come to the final presentation, and that will be given by Education Quality Provision. After this, the floor will be opened for questions for the entire presentations that have been made.
Thank you very much, Mr. MC, and Chair, distinguished guests, all protocol duly observed. The group that worked on quality education was an interesting one because our topic is quite broad and we had a lot of input. I've been given 10 minutes, but I hope I can highlight the key issues that came up so that we will make them, we will bolden them in the report that we will send to National. First, we looked at the issue of access to education generally, and we identified these challenges to access. One is school facilities. Some of schools are located at places that are too distant from the communities that they serve, and so students commuting becomes a challenge. Some facilities are not disability friendly, and so persons with special needs struggle to access them. Rural schools are struggling with teachers. They don't get enough teachers because teachers refuse posting to rural schools. For the basic level, some teachers cannot speak the first language of the learners that they teach. Meanwhile, the policy for teaching at the basic level, the lower primary, early grade is L1, and so that becomes a challenge. Poverty, we identify, is a big challenge for most of Ghanaians and they are not able to adequately fund their children's school fees, school or education, apart from what the government has taken. The other things they are supposed to provide, they are not able to, especially in the area of TVET, which is quite expensive because of the materials they need and use for learning. And so poverty becomes a challenge. TVET programs have been stigmatized, and so it is preventing access. Students who are interested are not, they do not want to go because they don't want to be stigmatized as not being smart, and that is a challenge. The informal part of TVET, which is mostly the apprenticeship programs we have, are not structured, and they are not standardized, and so they are also not attractive. So these are the key challenges limiting access. We also realize CSPSS selection is not fair. We know there are guidelines to the posting of students, but we doubt if the guidelines are rigidly followed because we have a lot of students having their way and getting the schools of choice where students who have distinguished themselves academically are not placed in those schools. Some of them decide not to go to school at all. And so that is a challenge. Limited boarding facilities, I think it's connected to infrastructure, and our infrastructure group will talk more about that. How can we improve this? We have a couple of suggestions. All school buildings should be disability friendly. I think there's a policy on that, but the implementation is a challenge. And so we are recommending that we highlight that. Moving forward, schools that are constructed, we are recommending that it should be sited as central point between communities. And then they should be provided with means of transport so that students who are commuting between the communities and their schools will be able to do that and unhindered. The school feeding program should be reinvigorated to make it more targeted. It looks like some schools that need to be there are not benefiting, and other schools who might not need it are the ones benefiting. Some parents are proving to be less responsible, and we believe there should be some community engagement, education, and sensitization to get parents to be responsible for their wards' education and be ready to contribute to their children's education. CSPSS should be recalibrated to make it fair to students so that if they are excelling, regardless of whether they completed private school or public school, they will have equal access to the schools of choice. Especially for TVET institutions, they feel CSPSS is not offering them enough students, and so we need to look at that. Scholarship schemes for persons who are disadvantaged, especially girls, should be encouraged. And the establishment of National TVET Fund could help to fund TVET because it is quite expensive, and it looks like government funding alone is not enough. In areas where schools have limited boarding facility, we are recommending that the focus should be placed on serving girls first before boys, because the girls are more vulnerable if they have to live off campus. We also talked about teacher quality, and we identified a number of issues there. We think that teacher quality has gone down, partly because of political interference in the recruitment of teachers. We feel that GES is not in charge, and it looks like the political figures have a stronger hand in the recruitment of teachers. We also identified that there are some new subjects introduced in schools where teachers have not been trained. Examples are career technology, creative arts, and performing arts introduced now, where we don't have qualified teachers teaching them, and it's affecting quality. Centralization of posting of teachers, we think, is also a challenge. And so somebody in Accra is deciding who teaches what at Abunkulubuyoyo. It's quite challenging. Maybe we should be thinking decentralization. Supervision and monitoring departments of GES is under-resourced, and they are not able to carry out the needed supervision. Low remuneration for teachers is also affecting quality, especially for TVET institutions. The teachers compare themselves to their colleagues who join industry, and they realize they are disadvantaged. So the best brains in TVET will not want to choose to be teachers in the TVET institutions. And so we need to find ways of motivating them. Teacher attrition is very high, and so we lose experienced teachers to other industries. And so we need to begin to think of how we can keep our teachers who are the most experienced. We have recommendations. One is to give GES the free hand to do recruitment and not offer slots to politicians. Then we should be thinking of decentralizing the posting of teachers so that our directorate at the district and regional level will have some kind of control over that. Teachers, where new subjects are introduced, we suggest that teachers should be trained before the subjects are introduced. In the situation that we have now, where the subjects are already introduced, we are recommending that a special program is organized, intensive 3 months or sandwich program, to get teachers in related subjects to be trained for the new subjects that have been introduced as an interim measure, as the universities prepare to roll out programs that will eventually train teachers to teach those subjects. We are recommending that the training institutions harmonize their curriculum and align it to demands on the field of work, especially for TVET institutions. The content being given should be ones that are relevant to the learners as they graduate and enter the job market. GES Supervision and Monitoring Department should be resourced to be able to do their supervisory assignment. Teachers should be given international exposure so that they get abreast with the best practices and emerging technologies of their time in order to improve their practice. Then we talk about the curriculum, the school curriculum. How can it better integrate new technologies and our cultural values? Here, our suggestions are that teachers at the TVET especially should be trained on technology. It looks like a lot of them are specialized in their areas and technology is missing. We are recommending that ICT infrastructure in our schools should be improved, and GES should seriously consider and revise the ban on use of smartphones, because we think it offers a lot of opportunities, but we are looking at only the negatives. If we can have a structured way of regulating its use, it might be more profitable than we seeing it as a challenge. PLC implementation should incorporate teachers' input. We suggest that the PLC is a good thing, but teachers feel like it's imposed on them. And now it feels more like it's being used as a tool for punishment. And so some teachers are not getting the essence of PLC, but the house felt it's a good practice, but we need to involve the teachers the more and get them to appreciate the relevance of PLC as a way of developing their competencies. There should be special motivation to attract teachers who will teach STEM subjects, because they have been introduced, but the people to teach them are not there. If we will need industry players to be involved, then we should be ready to pay more to attract them. For colleges of education curriculum, the recommendation is that we should harmonize the UCC curriculum and the non-UCC curricula. It looks like two curricula are operating in different colleges, and we believe they should be harmonized moving forward. Textbooks is a very important tool for quality education, and we believe the government should revisit its decision not to develop textbooks and to get back to the days where government was providing approved, developed textbooks that is coming from government. We believe those ones have higher standards, and we can trust those rather than what the private publishers are providing for our children. On the issue of inclusion, we identified issues related to TVET institutions not being friendly to persons with special needs as an issue. We also realized that at the basic level, teachers, special education teachers are not posted to the basic school, and so they are not able to provide their services to the students there who may have special needs. We are recommending that special schools should be established in every district so that it becomes it's also serve as a resource center for all the schools within the catchment area, providing services to the schools in order that persons with special needs can be identified early and the needed interventions put in place. Teachers should be empowered and resourced to be able to implement differentiated instruction and assessment to ensure that all learners are learning in our schools. Finally, on the issue of leadership, we identified issues related to political interference, and this was big because it showed up in all the groups, that leaders in our educational institutions feel their hands are tied. And it looks like in schools we have political informants who are reporting every minute the actions of the heads, and it's not giving them free room to operate. We also identify that there's policy discontinuity with every change of government in the TVET institutions, and it's affecting them. We are also identifying that there's no tenure of office for leaders in educational institutions, especially basic and secondary. And so you can get a head teacher, a headmaster staying for 15 years and not moving anywhere, and then creating artificial traffic for other leaders who are coming up. We also identify that in the basic level, some teachers are appointed leaders without any formalized training, without any background in leadership, and it's a struggle for them. Our recommendations are that school leadership appointments should be depoliticized, and the competent and most able people should be appointed to those offices, and they should also be given the free hand to operate. We are recommending that we should have a well-defined tenure of office for school leaders, and the pre-tertiary institutions may learn from committee systems that are practiced at the university, and more like leadership rotation as it exists in the universities, because it will give more people the opportunity to also prove their leadership skills and also contribute their quota towards school management. We are also recommending that colleges of education should be gradually transitioned to becoming autonomous, and so that the mentorship relationship will end. Some of them feel they are at a point where they could become autonomous institutions. And leadership in the colleges of education should be given to professionals. We saw situations where people from other sectors are appointed and they struggle to lead those institutions. We are recommending that unit heads of the mission unit heads should have stronger collaboration with the district education directors. It looks like there's some redundancy, some kind of conflict of roles, and we feel it's not very helpful. So their roles should be streamlined so that we are sure of how the relationship should be. And finally, we are recommending that councils, governing councils of institutions should be established without consideration for political affiliation. It is becoming the norm that highly politically exposed persons are appointed council members. And from day one, it looks like they come to champion political agenda. And we feel that is not helping education, especially at the tertiary education level. So in sum, these are the ideas that came, these are the highlights, but a lot more have been written down, and we'll hand them over to the committee as they move to Accra. We believe our input will be heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And in sum, I quote your last sentence. These are your ideas. And so these are the ideas you have presented. We wouldn't question your ideas. Just as he said, it will be submitted to the appropriate quarters for the necessary actions to be taken. And so there wouldn't be question time. Some may have to travel all the way back to as far as the Western region and other places. So we will take the closing remarks. Before we do that, I would like to still inform you that this program, this forum is streaming live on MOE, channel MOE TV. And so we are privileged to be live on there. Thank you very much for your time. We would like to take the closing remarks from a member of the planning committee, Mr. Stephen Owusu.
All right, thank you so much, Isaac. I'm here for 3 reasons. The first one is to announce that whatever inputs you have presented to us, we factored into our national coalition. So that is an assurance to you. That is why we wouldn't like to dilute any of the presentations by allowing people to also question. You might have our own versions of what you are presenting, but it is not our duty to address whatever your concerns are or to probably make an attempt to provide answers. You know, we want your opinions, we are putting all of them together, and then we have a national validation to go through that, collate everything, then you sieve those that we can drive or add to our policy. The other one is to express appreciation to all of you for making time to be part of this. In fact, it's a national discourse, it's a national event, and for you to make time to be part of this, especially our moderators, our rapporteurs, and those that were heading the various subgroups. We have had extensive discussion, and your ideas are so cogent that we wouldn't like to lose any of them. So we would like to thank all of you. Those of you that are closer to the regional minister, the regional coordinating director, I'm talking about the chief director and the entourage, please extend our appreciation to them. The team is so grateful. His Lordship, we are so grateful for making time to be part. Let's clap for him. Let's clap for him. He was with us at the opening and is here with us for the closing. And that gives us an indication of how education is so dear to his heart. We will be meeting the religious groups because we know you are partners and we can't do without you because most of the institutions are yours. And therefore, whatever you are doing in the schools in terms of making the attempt to make it better, we can leave you. So, Your Lordship, we will communicate when we are meeting. We will do so. The regional director and your team, thank you. On a short notice, you were able to invite this number we are seeing. I wanted to make time to go through the invitation, but every factor, every stakeholder has been invited and they are all here. I don't want to make time to go through that, but we are so grateful to all of you for making time to be part of this. In a way of support, in fact, we were expecting 150 in the room. Before you realize we are hitting 300. And we are getting a challenge that some of you were not even served during your group discussion. Because as they were flowing from one group to the other, they didn't get to your turn before you came here. I don't want to believe that we ran short of food, but they didn't get there because of the numbers. So we are so sorry. But everybody, there is provision for lunch. You provided snack, there is provision for lunch. There is also provision for fuel support for those that were on our list, and that is difficult to determine now. But I know that the finance people might be able to sort that one out. Those that were on the list and we invited, there is budget for fuel support. But because of the number that has doubled, it's becoming difficult for us to check your faces and tell you that you are not part of us. But I know that the invitation that we extended, some of you know so well that you are observers. We thank you for making time to be with us and for observing the event. And those that we extended invitation, we were also grateful to you. So MC, take us through the last stage. We are so grateful. Thank you, MC. Let me thank you so much for driving us. Congratulations for safe landing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Owusu, a member of the planning committee. On Monday, same will be held at Sunyani and Bolgatanga. Those of you that will not be able to make it to the place, we stay glued to channel MOE, as well as Pan-African TV. Pan-African TV is also streaming live. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Thanks. We would like to, at this time, invite the Deputy Chief Imam, who is here with us to give us the closing prayer.
Shall we pray? ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما اللهم اجعل بلدنا غانا بلدا آمنا مطمئنا وسائر بلاد المسلمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين آمين.
Thank you very much. So, Uncle Steve, how do we wait for the food? Would it be given us at the entrance or something? We go back to our breakout. Okay. Okay. So in order to give some order to the sharing of the food, please let's let's reverse to our breakout session rooms.